Welcome to our channel, where everyday stories are told with the most genuine emotions. If you're looking for family stories that are both humorous and heartfelt, then you've come to the right place. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. And now, let's dive into a very special day. The day I was kicked out of the house by my mother-in-law during the most intense family meeting we've ever had. The fateful family meeting and my mother-in-law's outburst. I still remember that day clearly, a Saturday afternoon just like any other. There was no rain, but something felt heavy in my chest. My wife, Lynn, said, "Mom's calling for a family meeting this afternoon. Make sure you come home early." I nodded, but inside, I was uneasy. It had been a long time since my mother-in-law summoned a family meeting like this. The last time was when my brother-in-law tried to sell the shared house without telling anyone. But this time, the reason was me. You're probably thinking, what on earth did he do? What could be so serious that it made his mother-in-law scream? Well, I just borrowed her car and accidentally scratched a long line down the door. Oh, and I may or may not have casually mentioned during dinner that her soup was a bit salty, even though she firmly believes she's the local master chef. Still, who would have thought such little things would trigger a full-blown storm? That afternoon, I stepped into my mother-in-law's house, and the atmosphere was so cold it felt like the AC was set to 60 degrees. Everyone was there. My father-in-law, sister-in-law, my wife, the two kids, and of course, my mother-in-law, with the most serious face I've ever seen. She cleared her throat. "Mr. Dung, please have a seat. Today, we need to have a clear discussion." I gave an awkward smile. "Yes, Mom. Please. Go ahead." And that was when the storm rolled in. Would you like me to continue translating the rest of the story? I stepped into my mother-in-law's living room. The air was so thick, you could almost cut it with a knife. A room I once found familiar suddenly felt foreign. The chairs were neatly arranged like a formal meeting. Everyone was already present. My father-in-law sat at the head of the table, silent and contemplative. My sister-in-law hugged a pillow, eyes filled with unease. My wife, Lynn, sat in the corner, fingers laced tightly together, her head bowed low. Only my mother-in-law sat upright, her eyes locked onto mine with an icy glare. I took a deep breath, stepped forward, and forced a nervous smile. Hello, everyone." No one responded. I sat down, feeling like my back was pressed against a wall of stone. The wooden chair, which normally felt smooth, now felt sharp and unforgiving. My mother-in-law tapped her fingers gently on the table. Knock, knock, knock. But the sound echoed like a judge's gavel inside my nerves. She looked me straight in the eyes and her voice came out slow and razor-sharp. "Dung, let me ask you directly. Do you think you're a responsible husband and father?" I swallowed hard. My heartbeat started to pound. I try my best." She cut me off before I could finish. Her words came crashing down like a waterfall. "Try your best? You try by taking my car for maintenance and bringing it back with a huge scratch on the rear door? You try by coming home and gluing your eyes to your phone while your wife is juggling the baby, cooking and cleaning?" She took a deep breath, then raised her voice, each word sharper than the last. "You try by eating the meal I spent all afternoon preparing, and then say, to my face, 'The soup's too salty, Mom?' I cooked that because I knew you were coming today." I tried to open my mouth to explain, but my lips only trembled. No words came out. Her voice trembled with anger, eyes sharp with fury. You think I'm too old to see what's going on? You think I don't notice how worn out my daughter looks every time she comes to visit? I see it all, Dung. Every bit of it. My daughter doesn't complain much, but I've wiped her tears with my own hands. My father-in-law cleared his throat, trying to intervene. All right, honey. Maybe slow down a bit. But she raised her hand to stop him, her eyes never leaving mine. No. I need to say this today, or this family might fall apart without us even realizing it. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me, like I was a defendant on trial. My throat tightened. Never before had my mother-in-law spoken to me so harshly. My sister-in-law spoke softly, hesitantly. Brother Dung, I get it, no one's perfect. But this isn't just a one-time thing. It's been going on for a while. Lynn doesn't say much, but I live nearby. I see everything. I turned to look at my wife. Lynn didn't say a word. Her face was downcast, hands clenched so tightly they turned pale. My chest felt crushed. In that moment, I wasn't angry. I didn't feel defensive, just an aching emptiness creeping in. I started to wonder, was I really wrong? Have I been that careless? I remembered the nights I laid on the couch watching YouTube while Lynn fed the baby and put him to sleep. I remembered complaining about the food not being to my taste, forgetting she had just gotten off work, rushed to the market, and carried a feverish child the night before. I remembered the quiet sigh she let out every time her mom called and asked, "Are you okay?" But I'd never once asked her that question. Not once. Now, everything was crashing down on me. There was no denying it. I wasn't the worst husband in the world, but clearly I was a man who had forgotten to care for the woman who gave birth to my child. And my mother-in-law, the elderly woman I once dismissed as difficult, was only angry because her daughter was hurting. I sat there in silence. No excuses, no arguments. Just silence. For the first time in years, I chose silence to truly listen. Would you like me to continue the translation with what happens next? I couldn't take it anymore. Every word, every accusing look pierced through me like freezing needles. My heart pounded, my fists clenched as I tried to stay calm, but I couldn't. I suddenly stood up. My voice rang out, no longer soft or patient. "I'm sorry, Mom, but don't you think you've gone too far? I'm Lynn's husband. I'm Bong's father. But I'm also a human being. I get tired. I make mistakes. I'm not perfect. But why is it that every time I mess up, I get dragged in front of the whole family and scolded like a child?" My mother-in-law shouted, her voice full of fury. "Because you act like a child. Adults own up to their mistakes. Adults fix what they break. Adults don't blame everything on being tired or stressed or busy. You're not living alone. You have a family, a wife, a child. Did you think my daughter got married just to live like this?" The air in the room exploded, like someone had thrown a silent bomb. My father-in-law shook his head and sighed. My wife, Lynn, kept her head down. She said nothing, but her hands were trembling. I saw it. I muttered, my voice barely audible. I really did try." My mother-in-law slammed her hand on the table. The sound echoed like a final verdict. "Enough. I've heard more than enough. If you think this family is too hard to live with, if you think being called out is unfair, then go. Leave. Leave my daughter, leave my grandchild. We'll survive just fine without you." I froze. The room fell completely silent. Only the slow, clacking sound of the ceiling fan remained. No one said a word. It was as if time itself had stopped. I looked around. No one looked at me anymore. They looked away, stared at the floor, or glanced at Lynn, the woman who was trying not to let her tears spill over. I turned toward her, wanting to say something, but my throat closed up. What I saw in her eyes wasn't anger or hatred. It was pain. Deep, quiet pain. I lowered my head and picked up my work bag, the one always packed and ready. I walked toward the door. Each step felt like I was crushing what was left of my pride beneath my feet. I didn't look back. I knew if I did, I would break. I was terrified of seeing my little daughter's face, terrified that those wide, innocent eyes would be my undoing. But then, I heard the door creak open behind me, and a small, clear voice cut straight through my heart like a blade. "Daddy, where are you going?" I stopped in my tracks. That voice, so soft, so light, and yet heavier than any accusation I'd heard that day. I bit my lip hard. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't let her see my eyes, already brimming with tears. I walked on, each step heavier than the last, as if I were carrying the weight of an entire building on my back. The awakening. I came home in a storm of emotions, not angry, not sad, not even upset anymore, just a deep sense of emptiness and cold. Our small home suddenly felt unnaturally big. No sound of a child's laughter, no familiar smell of home-cooked food, no soft shuffle of Lynn's slippers moving back and forth. Just the ticking of the clock and the dim yellow light casting shadows on the pale wall. I sat down on the sofa, the same one I usually collapsed onto every evening after work. But tonight, as I leaned back, there was no comfort, only guilt. On the table still stood our wedding photo, the one I used to think symbolized happiness. We were dressed in pure white, smiling brightly in a garden full of flowers. Back then, I truly believed, as long as we have each other, we'll be happy. I picked up the frame. Looking at Lynn's smile in that photo, memories began to flood my mind. The little things I used to overlook now pierced my heart like tiny blades. I remembered the nights our daughter had a fever. Lynn stayed up all night, holding her, wiping her sweat, lowering the fever, mixing formula, while I slept soundly or turned my back and pretended not to hear the cries. The mornings I rushed to work while she cooked comforted our daughter and still saw me to the door, and I forgot to say a simple thank you. The times I came home tired, laid on the couch scrolling TikTok while Lynn cleaned the mess our toddler made, and I even had the nerve to complain. Why is this house always a mess? I remembered the look in her eyes, tired but forcing a smile. I've been cleaning since morning. And I said, nothing. I remembered snapping, the soup's too salty, while my mother-in-law had spent the whole afternoon in the kitchen. I thought I was being honest, maybe even funny, but who feels joy being criticized like that in front of the entire family? I leaned my head back and let out a long sigh. I've never hit my wife. I don't drink. I don't gamble. I've never cheated. I come home on time. I hand over my full salary. I used to think that was enough, that it made me a good husband. But no. I finally realized what I lacked wasn't money. It was presence. I was with my wife every day, but where was my mind? I lived with her, but did I ever listen? Did I ever ask, "Are you tired today?" Or, "Is there anything you're unhappy about?" The answer is no. I never walked out on her. I never raised my voice in front of others. But I also never truly stayed. Not emotionally, not mentally, not as a partner in responsibility. I began to think about my daughter. Bong is 4 now. She always clings to me, asking me to tell her stories at night. One evening, I was tired, and I snapped at her. "Enough!" Let Dad rest for a bit. She quietly walked to her room and didn't ask again. Now, remembering that, my heart aches. What kind of father can't even spare 15 minutes for a bedtime story? I saw myself in the mirror, exhausted, worn down, and ashamed. Not because of my mother-in-law's words, not even because of Lynn's disappointment, but because I finally understood. I had hurt the very people who loved me most through my daily neglect. That kind of neglect isn't loud. It's quiet, like a slow dripping faucet, but enough to erode the very foundation of a home. I sat there for a long time. No TV, no phone, just sitting and thinking. About Lynn, about my mother-in-law, about Bong, and about myself. I don't know if they'll forgive me. I'm not even sure what I can do to make things right. But I know this. If I don't change now, I'll lose them. Not because of a moment of anger, but because I'll no longer deserve to keep them. The next morning, I woke up early. I had barely slept all night. I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling, checking my phone over and over. No messages, no missed calls. Lynn's silence felt like a silent cut, not painful at first, but deep and cold to the core. I put on a shirt, fixed my hair, and decided to do something I never thought I would. I went to my mother-in-law's house. It was still early, the yard damp with dew. I stood for a few moments at the gate, trembling yet determined. I opened the gate and walked in. The house was quiet. No one came to greet me, but I knew they were inside, maybe watching through the window, maybe waiting to see why I had come. I walked to the middle of the yard. No words, no rehearsed speech. I knelt down. The sound startled my father-in-law. He opened the door and stepped out. He froze when he saw me kneeling there, hands placed neatly, head bowed low. "Dung, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. I looked up, voice calm but choked. "I'm sorry. I didn't come here to defend myself. I came because I know I was wrong. Not just to Lynn, not just to Mom, but to myself, to my role as a husband and a father." I took a deep breath and continued, each word pulled straight from my heart. "I'm sorry to Mom. Sorry to Lynn. Sorry to little Bong for not showing her what a loving, responsible father looks like. I'm not asking to be forgiven right away. I just ask for a chance to do better, and not for pride, but because I don't want my daughter to grow up thinking her father gave up so easily." My mother-in-law stepped out. She stood at the top of the stairs, arms folded, the same stern face, but in her eyes, the anger had faded. There was only silence and worry. She didn't speak. She just looked at me. I bowed my head again, lower this time. I know, an apology can't undo everything that's happened. But if you give me one more chance, I promise I'll never let anyone in this family feel let down again. A few seconds passed, but they felt like an eternity. Then suddenly, she turned around and walked back inside. Not a word. I watched, hollow inside. But then, the door opened again. She came back out, looked at me, and this time, her gaze was gentler than I'd ever seen. "Come inside," she said, her voice softer than ever. I froze. I hadn't even stood up yet. Then she added, her lips tight as if holding back a smile. "The soup I made today, it's pretty bland. Can you handle that?" I laughed, a laugh that was choked, but full of relief. "Yes, Mom. Bland soup is the best meal I've ever had. I stepped into the house, carefully slipping off my shoes. In the kitchen, Lynn stood with her back turned. She looked over her shoulder at the sound of my steps. Her eyes were swollen, red, but she was still so beautiful it took my breath away. I walked over and gently took her hand. "I'm sorry," I said. This time, no excuses, no explanations. She looked at me, then gave a quiet nod. She didn't say anything. But I knew. Things weren't fixed, but they had started again. If you've ever had conflict with someone you love, if you've ever said something that left them hurt, remember this: no one is perfect. But those who truly reflect, apologize sincerely, and make real changes through action, they always deserve another chance. Happiness doesn't come from empty words. It comes from how you show up every day in the quiet, ordinary moments. Subscribe to the channel for more real, heartfelt, and relatable stories like this every week. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it. Because maybe, just maybe, this is exactly what they need to start again, just like I once did.